Hi. Over the course of about 2.5 to 3 hours, I purchased, downloaded, played through, finished, and then thought about, like majority of the time, was spent thinking about one specific game. The reason I spent so much time thinking about this game is because this is one of the most unhinged, confusing, yet amazing video games that I've ever played in my entire life when it comes to horror games. Keep in mind that some of my favorite horror games of all time are games like Outlast or Silent Hill or Resident Evil or The Evil Within. Games that take a specific niche of horror and push it to the extremes. For example, in Silent Hill, it's more on the psychological and depressing side. When it comes to Outlast, it's more on the splatterpunk and violence and gore side. And with a game like Mouthwashing, the game that we're talking about today, it takes almost everything and gradually pushes the walls of what's acceptable until it breaks through, and then the walls fall down, and then it keeps going. Mouthwashing was released in the year 2024 by a developer known as Wrong Oregon. It's an indie developed game, and it's gaining traction extremely quickly for good reason. It is a fantastic game. However, it's also one of the most confusing and unhinged games that I've ever played in my entire life. For example, it's been about 3.5 hours since I finished the game, and I'm still thinking about it. I don't know what I played. I'm still confused. All I know is that I had a really good time playing it, and it was amazing. So we're going to talk about it. So how I'm going to talk about this game is in the sequence of events of what unfolds in the game. I'm sure there are other channels out there that put it in chronological order and kind of break it down. I'm just going to explain what happens from when you start the game to when you end the game, so that even if you don't play the game, you understand why this game is so good, and also why it's so depressing, and also why it's so confusing. Because once the game is said and done, you're left with a lot more questions than answers. For example, why is the game called Mouthwashing? Why is Curly looking like that? What happened to him? Why is the game called Mouthwashing? And finally, why is the game called Mouthwashing? Before we even get into the explanation and the description of the game, I'm going to go ahead and say that there are massive spoilers ahead. I highly suggest you guys play this game for yourself. It's a fantastically crafted game. The story is amazing. The character development is insane, to say the least. I highly suggest everyone play the game. The game is about $12 on Steam, but it's going to an indie developer and not a AAA gaming company. So I think, in my personal opinion, you should always support indie developed games. So go ahead and buy the game and play it for yourself, because it is an amazing experience. And I'm going to go ahead and give you guys some key points before we jump into this, because these key points are key. No shit. To understanding the game without actually playing it. So here are some key points before we even jump into the game. Like I said, the entire game takes place on a spaceship. The map is very small. You can go around the entire map and explore every single room in the span of about 2 minutes. There are 5 characters in the entire game of Mouthwashing, and only 2 of those characters are playable characters. The first character is named Curly. Curly is the primary captain of the ship that you're on. He is the pilot. The second is Jimmy, his co-pilot, the co-captain, and the second playable character. Words are fucking hard. The third character in Mouthwashing is none other than Anya. Anya is the ship's nurse, but she's very bad at being a nurse. We'll get to that when we get to it. The fourth character in Mouthwashing is named Swansea. Swansea is the ship's mechanic, maintainer, and the more you interact with him, the more you realize the dude is just a dip. He's an asshole, but he's a blue collar worker, and from what I've gathered, he's worked for the company for about 13 years. So he kind of earned the right to be an asshole. And the fifth character works directly under Swansea as his intern, and his name is Daisuke. Daisuke is a happy-go-lucky teenager. He might be like 20, 21 years old, and that's it. He's just there. I mean, the game could have progressed without him, but he's there. Now, I may say things like that. However, every character in Mouthwashing plays a very critical role in the story unfolding of what happened on this ship and what happened to every individual character in the game of Mouthwashing. Now, without further ado, let's get into the explanation of a game called Mouthwashing. So the game begins with kind of like a mission briefing statement that says, Pony Express long-haul space freighter Tulpar. Pony Express is the company that they work for. It isn't really that important, but there are multiple references to it as the game progresses. So if you see a horse, just know that it's referencing the company of Pony Express. And the ship's name is Tulpar. Who gives a shit? Crew 5, the 5 crew members that we already discussed. Planned shipment duration 382 days, so slightly over a year is how long this mission is supposed to last. Elapsed transit time 147 days, how long it took for them to get to this destination from the Earth or wherever the fuck they came from. And the final thing it says at the bottom is, I hope this hurts. Don't really know what the fuck that's about. It doesn't really come into play until the very end of the game, but just keep that in the back of your little noodle, your little noggin there. You are then thrown directly into the game with a huge message displayed on screen saying 0 days before the crash. Another message then pops up on the bottom saying that there is an unknown mass ahead of you and to veer off to the left about 1.4 degrees. You are then able to control the ship via the pilot's stick. Forgot what the fuck they call that shit. All I know is this one. I don't know this one, so... this fucking thing, in order to try and veer the ship left to avoid the collision. However, the only option there is to steer right, directly into the path of the unknown object. On the right of the pilot stick is a big red button, and obviously you are supposed to push that big red button. However, it's locked under a glass case like Deal or No Deal with Howie Mandel. So you have to find a key in order to unlock that case to push the button. So when you do find the key and you insert it in there and hit the button, you find out that you overrode the autopilot system. Basically, the ship's gonna crash. Like you fucked everything, the ship's gonna crash, and it's your fault. Once you finish sabotaging the pilot's controls, you then run out into the hallway and you're greeted by hallways. Holy shit. And the further down you get into the hallways, the more posters appear on the side. Basically, they're propaganda posters for the company that you work for, Pony Express, where there's the pony on there with a bunch of slogans on it. Not really important, but just picture World War II American propaganda, but for a company that clearly doesn't give a shit about its employees. And that's what's dotted throughout the hallways. You start running down these short hallways that veer off to the left or the right on sharp 90-degree angles, and you kind of find out that there is no end to the hallways. As a matter of fact, the longer you run down these hallways, the more posters pop up, and eventually the entire hallway is just littered with these posters. The mascot pops out, gives you a little jump scare or two, and then the game freezes, and it seems like the game crashed because it starts, you know, here's the audio clip of what happens. You see what I mean? It seems like the game crashes. However, it fades to white, and when the game comes back into focus again, you're sitting at a table with Anya, Daisuke, and what the fuck is I always forget his fucking name. What is it? Swansea. That old fuck. You're greeted with another message saying 2 months after the crash. So this is where this game kind of branches out and differs from the traditional sense of horror when it comes to things like this. And I know what I said just didn't make sense, so let me explain what I mean. Usually when a game or movie starts off hot like that, like intentionally crashing into an unknown object and then hallucinating yourself running around a spaceship with never-ending hallways with a fucking moose-looking pony chasing after you, usually the game goes back in time and then explains the events that led up to what you just experienced. However, with this game, it deviates because instead of going back in time, it goes further into time because the message that greets you once you wake up at the table is 2 months after the crash. So this is where I knew the game was going to be kind of different, but also kind of confusing because there is no explanation for what we just saw, and I wasn't sure if they were going to explain it at all. Anyway, I'm going to explain the rest of this game to you. So let's continue. What is happening right now is that there is a discussion amongst the crew trying to see if they can get into the cargo hold to see what kind of freight they're actually hauling because reasons. There wasn't really an explanation for that, and if there was, it must have not have been important because I don't remember it. They just want to go and see what they're hauling, kind of like Callisto Protocol. Like, what are we hauling? Why are these people trying to take us over? But except there's no one trying to take them over, they're just curious. Daisuke and Swansea are kind of going back and forth saying that they should go look in the cargo hold. However, the only person that has access to the cargo hold is the captain. And the captain is MIA at this point, and you don't know what happened to him, which is the first hint that you are playing from the perspective of somebody completely different. Spoiler alert, the person that you are playing as right now is Jimmy, the co-captain. The discussion ends with you, Jimmy, saying that you're going to go look for the captain's scanner so you can get into the cargo hold. So at this point in time, your only mission is to go and look for the captain's scanner. The captain's scanner is inside of the cockpit, and in order to get to the cockpit, you have to walk past the utility room where Swansea and Daisuke usually work. So when you're running to the cockpit area, you see Swansea just kind of standing in front of the utility room, and he's saying, "It's not safe in here. I'm going to sit here and guard it so that nobody can go in there, because if the foam in there is breached, it's going to suck us out into space." And I just realized that I didn't explain one kind of crucial part of this game. So the ship did crash. Because it crashed into something, the hull was breached and air leaked out into space. In order to minimize the amount of air that was lost to space, as well as cut off areas that are unsafe to travel to, the ship dispersed a bunch of foam to block off areas. So there's a bunch of foam in areas that are unsafe to travel, basically limiting where you can go in the map. That's why when you play this game, there's a bunch of foam everywhere, because the ship did crash and the foam is there to stop people from going into places where the hull had been breached. That's why Swansea's bitch ass is kind of just standing in front of the utility room, and he's like, there's a bunch of foam and it's not safe. So I'm guarding it, even though there's foam here and nobody can access it anyway, but I'm going to stand here because I'm a fucking asshole. All jokes aside, Swansea is a blue collar guy. I've been blue collar for the past 13 years. I've known so many people like Swansea, so I can't even dog him too hard, because I know people like Swansea. Yes, I am older than you think. Okay, let's move on. You find the scanner in the cockpit area and you rush over to the cargo hold, only to see fucking Swansea standing in front of the place you need to push the buttons, the keypad, and he's like, "We should get our nurse down here in order for us to be a family." Fuck yourself, Swansea. How about that? You ever thought about that? So then you run up to the medical bay in order to get Anya, the ship's nurse, down to the cargo hold so that you can see what kind of freight you're hauling. And that's when you see Curly for the first time. Curly, if you don't remember me explaining it earlier, is the ship's original captain. Allegedly the dude who crashed the ship into the asteroid on purpose. And you remember what I said about Anya, about how she's not a good nurse, like, at all? This is the reason why. As soon as you see Anya, she's asking you to give him his pain medication because she can't handle the sounds of him taking his medication. That's like your whole job, bitch. That's the whole reason you're here. You can't do it. Jump out of the window, please. So you give Curly his medication, and Curly he's fucked up. Like, that dude he's fucked. He's fucked up. He looks like that dude from Fallout New Vegas. Don't remember his name, but you know who I'm talking about. Looks just like him, but way more fucked up. So now you've met every single person on the team. You got Curly, who is upstairs, just fucked up. You got Anya, the nurse, who just doesn't know how to nurse or can't handle being a nurse. So why is she a nurse in the first place? Swansea, the asshole. Daisuke, the dude. He's just a fucking chill guy. And then you, Jimmy, the co-pilot, now the captain of the ship. All five. You then run down to the cargo hold to check out what the ship is hauling, and all three of your other teammates are joining you there. I said three because Curly obviously can't move. I don't know if you've ever seen him, but he's fucked up. Once you get down to the cargo hold and open up the door, you are greeted by just shelves upon shelves upon shelves of the same exact box. And as soon as you enter the cargo hold, the game freezes again, and takes you back into time to 7 days before the crash. Like I said, the game is very confusing in the timeline. It's kind of like Pulp Fiction where it jumps between them. Right now we are 7 days before the crash. This time when you come to, you are back playing as Curly, the original captain, the dude who's fucked up. I'm going to keep referring to him as fucked up because that dude is fucked up. And you are in the middle of a psychological exam administered by none other than fake nurse Anya. Of course, Curly gives the exact same answers because I'm pretty sure they do this test like at least once a month. So of course she's going to remember his answers in order to pass the psychological test because turns out Curly is fucking losing it. Anya reveals that she is falling in lust, not love, falling in lust with a specific crew member who is to remain unnamed until we get further into the game. So I will not tell you who that person is, so you can get the same fucking deck to the face that I did. You were then able to explore the ship before the great crash happened. Nothing really is different other than people are a little more morale driven, like nobody's kind of depressed, you know what I mean? You then come across Jimmy, who then asks you to meet him in the cockpit, and you oblige, and as you're running down to the cockpit, you see that Curly is absolutely losing his mind because he falls down into one of the oceans from Iron Lung. I don't know if it's actually from Iron Lung, but the way that the graphics are, it just kind of reminds me a lot of Iron Lung, and that's the only real way I can describe what's happening right here. As you are running through this Iron Lung environment, a bunch of ladders start popping up out of the blood ocean, and a lot of emergency stickers start popping up in your vision and start clouding everywhere that you look. You also hear loud footsteps start approaching you from behind. However, at the point in which you hear the footsteps coming to you, you are unable to turn around to see what it is. Your only option is to run straight into a sun that is getting increasingly and increasingly brighter. Once you literally run into the sun, a doorway will appear at the end, and if you run through the doorway, guess what? You pop out in the cockpit. Jimmy then asks you if you're okay, how you're feeling. You can basically get the gist that Jimmy and Curly are friends, if not very, very close. Jimmy then leaves the room as soon as you get a message from corporate, or the big guys as he refers to them. Once you go to read the message from corporate, the game does its whole glitch effect and fades into a different location, and this location is inside of the cargo hold. The reason you can tell it's in the cargo hold is because it has all the same boxes that you saw before we went into this weird delusional flashback. As you are traversing the cargo hold, you come across a CRT TV that is playing propaganda for the company of Pony Express. You are able to scroll through the channels, and then the game makes you pause on one specific advertisement for a mouthwash known as Dragon X. Once the advertisement finishes, the entire game does the whole glitch effects and transitions back into the perspective of Jimmy when you enter the cargo hold in the previous timeline of 2 months after the crash. And it turns out every single box you're seeing there is filled to the brim with Dragon X mouthwash. Your entire freight is made up of literally countless boxes of this mouthwash. As the characters are discussing the ingredients of Dragon X mouthwash, you come to find out that this mouthwash has 14% ethanol alcohol in it, and the amount of sugar that's thrown into the mouthwash offsets literally any type of disinfectant that could come out of using this as an effective mouthwash. So this is only really good for drinking and getting just obliterated off of mouthwash, because Swansea takes a big ass swig of this fucking thing and then lets everybody know that he was, before that, 15 years sober from alcohol, and he figured because of the situation that they found themselves in, he might as well go out in style, and fucked up. So he decides to just drink this alcohol that's in this mouthwash. Ethanol alcohol will kill you. It will. After Swansea takes that massive swig and tries to persuade Daisuke into drinking the alcohol as well, the game glitch effects into another timeline, back into Curly's point of view 6 days before the crash. And your only objective is to break the news. At this point, we can infer that the news comes from that corporate letter that was given to him from corporate when Jimmy left the room after his whole episode of Iron Lung. So Curly makes his way up to the lounge area in order to break the news to the rest of the crew. However, when he gets there, he finds out that everyone is throwing him a surprise birthday party, which sucks because the news that he has to give is that the company is shutting down, and after this run, everyone will be let go. This sends Jimmy into a rage because he knows that Curly will be safe because he is a very revered pilot, and he knows that everyone else will just kind of be thrown to the gutter while Curly will continue being a freighter pilot just for other airline space lines. Whatever the fuck. You then cut the birthday cake because you're still at a party for yourself, and now you just broke this news in the middle of this party, which is a horrible time to break the news. Curly obviously needs to get some social engineering going in his life because he fucking sucks at it. In the middle of cutting the cake, the game glitches out into a different timeline, and you're back in the perspective of Jimmy, and this is now 3 months after the crash, and if you remember, it's exactly about 1 month after the previous iteration of when you found the mouthwash. It is very apparent that in that 1 month, the crew had drank, Swansea had drank a lot of mouthwash because all over the floors, all over the cabinets in the bar kitchen area, all over the table is just nothing but empty bottles of mouthwash. And in the background, you can hear Curly just screaming and crying in pain because he hasn't taken his painkillers yet, or that's what's going through Jimmy's mind. So the next part of the game is that you need to go over to Curly and give him his painkillers. As you make your way to Curly, grab the painkillers and go to give him his painkillers, a thought occurs to Jimmy that he doesn't want to overdose Curly, so maybe he should go and find Anya to see if he had taken his painkillers yet. So he has to go and look for Anya because her bitch ass doesn't want to give him no fucking painkillers because she doesn't know how to nurse. You go around the entire ship looking for Anya and find her and Swansea kind of talking in secret inside of the cockpit about who knows what. Even after completing the game, I don't even know what they were talking about. All I know is that they were having a fucking emergency meeting like Among Us in the cockpit for no apparent reason. Anya then tells you that she didn't give him his painkillers because she couldn't handle the sound. Still 3 months later, you fucking serious, dude? As you are standing over Curly about to give him his painkillers, Jimmy kind of snaps and he starts taking his frustrations out on Curly, saying things like, how could you do this to us? I am in the driver's seat now. Everyone looks up to me. All of this freaking stress, all because of you. The screen fades to black and you can hear the audio of Jimmy giving Curly his painkillers, also accompanied by Jimmy beating the absolute fuck out of him. Basically, like I said, he's venting out his frustrations, but he's beating a man who is unable to care for himself, let alone defend himself. And the sound of him just beating the absolute shit out of this dude is kind of unsettling in its own way. The game comes back in and you're standing over Curly again. And as you turn around to leave the room, the game does the glitch effect, but this time it doesn't fade back into a different timeline. It fades into somewhat of a hallucination because this time you are entered into the lounge area, except there's no other crew members in there except for Curly. Curly sits in front of the birthday cake and starts talking to you. And at this point in the game, you start to realize how close Curly and Jimmy actually are. Because Curly says things like, I could be happy, I could find a wife, buy a house and settle down, or I could sit here and have some piece of shit cake with my best friend. So if you don't mind, can you go and get a knife and cut us both a slice? You then go around the entire ship looking for a knife, and when you enter the cockpit, the only interactable object throughout the entirety of the segment is an axe that is placed inside of the cockpit chair. Once you grab the axe and run back up to Curly, Curly is then laying on top of the table. The only option you have here is to take the axe and chop Curly up, but as soon as the axe comes like within 3 inches of Curly's flesh, the game fades out again. Once the game fades back into view, you are then met with the same timeline you were in before the entire hallucination, except 1 entire month had passed, because at this point you are at 4 months after the crash, and at this point in the game, you can see just how much mouthwash the crew had drank, because there are just boxes upon boxes opened and emptied, littered throughout the entirety of the cargo area. Once you exit the cargo hold, you run across Daisuke laying on the floor, kind of explaining his situation to you, saying that his mom had found this internship for him because he was never really good at anything, so he just took this job on a whim, and look where that ended up. He hands you the mouthwash and says that he wants to be alone, so then you continue on towards the lounge area. Once you get to the lounge area, you see Anya sitting at the table looking at the mouthwash, and when you tap her on the shoulder to talk to her, you end up startling her because she was so focused on this mouthwash. She then confides in you as the captain, saying that they had ran out of painkillers for Curly, and she knows where there is extra painkillers, and it's in a medical cabinet right next to the medical bay. However, it's covered in foam, and they need the axe in order to get to this medical area. But 2 catches. The first catch is that it is so close to the breach that if they cut even 1 inch too close to the breach, they could all be sucked out into space. And the second catch is that Swansea has the axe, and Swansea ain't giving up that fucking axe. Jimmy, of course, being the captain, has to go and attempt it, so he goes up to Swansea, who is just busting a fucking move. This dude is Dougieing in the middle of this tragedy that's happening right now, and gets mad when you ask for the axe because he's blaming you for everything that happened, because of course he needs to blame somebody and you're the one in charge. That's just what happens when you're in charge. Something goes wrong, it's your fault. If you don't understand, you're not in that position. Once you get to that position, you'll understand. Once something fucks up, it's always your fault. Of course, once you get the axe, you are able to get the painkillers out of the little cabinet, but once you try to give it to Anya, she says, "Can you give it to Curly because it still makes me nauseous?" Remember, this is a fucking nurse we're talking about. She's a nurse. I know that I'm hard on her, and for people who have played the game are probably going to comment this if I don't say it now, so I'm going to say it. Anya is only working for the company because she failed out of medical school. So she's technically not even a nurse, but she's just barely qualified enough to take this job. It is a classic basic story of big companies hiring at the lowest rates and getting the least qualified people to take on these massive jobs. That's what I'm gathering from Anya's character. Obviously, Jimmy freaks out and says that this is your job. This is the whole reason you're here, so why can't you do it? But eventually calms himself down and says, you know what, go take care of Daisuke because he's fucked up in the floor in front of the cargo hold. So I'm going to go take care of Curly. You go take care of Daisuke. So he goes up to Curly and eventually says, you try to tell me about the pressure. I didn't listen to you. Why didn't I listen to you? I'm so sorry for everything that I've done to you. And I know the kind of stress that you were under before. So I'm sorry. And then gives him his painkillers. Once you give him his painkillers, again, the game fades to black. Great song, by the way. And once it fades back in, you are standing in the cockpit and somebody is pounding on the door, demanding to be let in. This particular segment of the game is extremely short. It's basically somebody's trying to get into the cockpit and you are locking the door. You lock the door, you take a rope, you tie the door off, and then you put a lead pipe and you shove it through the lock. And then the glass breaks, showing that it's Swansea trying to get in and kill you. But before he can, the game fades again, and this time you are in the control of Curly, and you're with Anya looking at the massive wall of TVs that they got going on in the lounge room. This segment is also extremely short, but it's 2 days before the crash, and it's just Curly and Anya talking to each other about safety, of why the medical room is locked but the sleeping quarters isn't. Screen fades to black again, and when it comes to, it's 5 months after the crash, and Daisuke is running and yelling at you to help because Anya has locked herself inside of the medical room with Curly. As Daisuke and Jimmy are yelling at her to open the door, she's saying like, this is the best decision I'm going to make. You were right all along. I should have done this from the beginning. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. And there is no way that they're getting through this door. So Daisuke and Jimmy come to a conclusion that they need to get to the utility room because there is a vent that leads up into the medical room to try and see what Anya's doing in there to Curly. So that's what they do. They run down to the utility room to try and get into the vent. But guess who the fuck is down there? Fucking Swansea. And Swansea is just obliterated. Bruh is fucked up. Like I said and he said at the beginning, he is not letting anybody into the utility room because it's just too dangerous. There's too much foam. And he doesn't want anybody going in there and accidentally breaching the hull. So he sits there and guards it. Hey, feature editing Spooky here. And like I said, the timelines are extremely confusing. And I confused two of them here. So I'm going to do a little bit of a on-the-fly editing. So literally in the middle of you talking to Swansea, the screen fades to black and cuts into this timeline that I'm about to talk about here. You come back into the game one day before the crash, again in control of Curly. Only this time your objective is to find the gun, which is very ominous to just come into a game as. You know what I'm saying? You're running around the entire ship looking for anything that could resemble a gun because at this point in the game, you've never even known that there was a gun on the ship. As a matter of fact, having a gun on a spaceship is ill-advised and irresponsible, might I add. You get to the cockpit and find Anya having a panic attack under one of the chairs. You go to her and find out that she has been impregnated by somebody in the crew, the same guy that she was lusting over before, the same unknown individual. Once you leave the cockpit, the game then changes timelines again, and right around here is where that timeline ends, and we are back talking to Swansea as he's fucked up in the middle of the chair guarding the utility room. Obviously isn't moving because he's way too drunk, so Daisuke and Jimmy come up with a plan to feed him even more alcohol so that he'll pass out, give him the axe as well as access to the utility room to clear out the foam. So Jimmy runs up into the lounge area and makes a cocktail of, get this, mouthwash and isopropyl alcohol. And then he makes it digestible because he throws sweetener in it. This thing, that cocktail is enough to put a lifelong alcoholic on their ass. So they make it and give it to Swansea because fuck him. They give it to Swansea and of course Swansea passes out because they gave him pure gasoline at this fucking point. And Daisuke is like, is he going to be okay when we, the audience, as well as Jimmy, knows that he's going to be okay because he's been doing nothing but tanking mouthwash with 14% alcohol in it for the past, what, fucking 4 months now? Probably drinking nothing but that. He'll be okay. So they gain access to the utility room, and as soon as they enter the utility room, they found out that it hasn't been breached in any way, shape, or form. There is no foam anywhere. It's just that Swansea had been guarding it because inside of it was one working cryogenic pod that was able to sustain a life in it for 20 years. Jimmy comes to the conclusion that Swansea had been protecting the room and biding his time because he wanted to be the one in the cryo chamber to save his own skin. That's why he didn't want anybody else in that room to know what was in there, so that when push comes to shove and the ship starts fucking collapsing, he was able to save his own skin. They ignore this for the time being, and Daisuke makes his way up the vent into the medical room. Once he's in there, he screams and asks Anya what she's doing and what did she do. The game then, guess what, fades to fucking black again. Like I said, very Pulp Fiction-like, jumping between things and explaining the story in fragments. I think it's great, but other people may not like it so much. Once it comes to Daisuke is bleeding profusely over his entire sleeping bag, and Swansea is yelling at you because you let him do this, and so now your mission is to look for disinfectant. The first place I thought I'd find disinfectant would be the medical bay, so I immediately run into the medical bay, and the place in which Curly and Anya would be is completely, I don't even want to say blurred out. I don't know what effect that is, but that should be utilized more because that was fucking cool. Swansea's already in there and is yelling at you because he's already looking in here. Go look somewhere else. So you run down to the cargo hold and find that there is a gravestone on it. And once you shine your captain's light at the gravestone, it disintegrates and leads you down a never-ending staircase into the cargo hold. Once you get to the bottom of the staircase, and by bottom, I mean wherever the game decides is the bottom, you are then on a platform with a note that says, "The beast is blind, there is no running from it." And in the background, you can hear a massive creature or something running around the cargo hold while you are above it on platforms and boxes moving indicating where it is. And the entire point of this segment is to maneuver your way around this platform without alerting the monster where you are, because if you do, guess what? You have to start all the way the fuck over. This took me so goddamn long. Once you find the disinfectant at the end of the platform, you then immediately get teleported back to Daisuke, only this time what flashes on the screen in terms of time is 6 hours until judgment. Daisuke is still laying there in his own blood and in very, very, very much pain, a lot of pain, and Swansea is sitting there with an axe across his lap and says, "You could have taught me so much. I'm sorry that I couldn't protect you. You were such a good kid." Takes the axe and just fucking right on his face, dude. Just right on, dude. What the fuck? What the fuck is happening right now? I don't know. I still don't. Jimmy understandably is like, what the fuck? We could have saved him. We could have helped him, but you're being selfish because you're drunk right now. And we know all about your cryopod thing you got going in there. So why don't you just get in that cryopod and let us all die? And Swansea says, "Huh, if you want the cryopod so much, just go take it. I have everything I could ever want here on this ship. I don't care about the cryopod." So that leaves the question, why did he not tell anybody about the cryopod? A question that is answered very soon. Swansea then leaves and you get a new objective of get the gun, the same gun that Curly was looking for in the previous iteration. This time the gun is inside of the medical bay, and once you get into the medical bay, you find that Anya had killed herself by taking 3 bottles of painkillers right next to Curly. And it is very detailed, which is insane to say the least. At this point, I put 2 and 2 together to find out that Daisuke had hurt himself on the way up the vent, because the vent at this point in time had been so mangled that it was impossible for people to go and work maintenance up there. So it must have been as he went up into the vent, he scratched himself, bleeding profusely, and found Anya in there and was able to unlock the door to let Jimmy in there. So to clear some things up, the timeline that we're in right now, the 6 hours till judgment timeline, is still the same timeline of Jimmy. Still where they knocked out Swansea, where they found all the mouthwash, where they found all this shit. And the other timeline is just straight Curly. The other random shit like the platforms, that was very clearly hallucinations. So, like I said, this game's very confusing. Once you retrieve the gun from the case, Curly starts laughing, kind of weirdly, and then you open the door and Swansea is then rushing you with the axe, screaming, "Jimmy!" And the game fades to black before you see what happens. But you can assume that he took the gun and shot Swansea. That's what you would assume anyway. The reason I say that is because you don't actually hear the report of a gunshot. You don't see the muzzle flash or anything that would indicate that you shot him. Because right as he's screaming at you, it fades to black. And then you come to in the previous timeline before the crash, back in the medical bay, and Anya is on the floor, sort of crying. You ask Anya why she's crying, and she says that she told whoever got her pregnant that she's pregnant, and he just kind of walked off and didn't say anything. So you say, okay, I'll go talk to him. And you make your way down to the cockpit area and you find out that it's none other than Jimmy. Jimmy was the one who got him pregnant and who Anya was lusting for this entire time. Jimmy then says that he'll take care of it and walks into the cockpit area, and that's when the alarm starts sounding. As you're sprinting your way to the cockpit, you see Jimmy in the middle of the floor in a fetal position, rocking back and forth, and you scream at him, "What did you do?" As you enter the cockpit, you see that on the screens it says crash imminent. This is where it was revealed that Curly was not the one who crashed the spacecraft. It was Jimmy. Jimmy did it because Jimmy's a fucking idiot and a coward, and I guess got scared that he was going to be a father because that would mean responsibility. This is all headcanon, by the way, but it will kind of make sense as the video goes on because we are kind of close to the end, but still nowhere near it. Right before the spacecraft crashes into that unknown object, the screen fades to black again and cuts to the timeline of after the crash. And this time you come to inside of the medical bay, but you are carrying Curly's mangled fucking body in your hands and you're walking towards the lounge area. Once you make your way into the lounge area and to the table, you find the entirety of the crew sitting around the table, except they're all dead. I don't know how to make that more dramatic. They're just dead sitting around a table. Swansea is dead via a gunshot to his forehead. Daisuke is dead via the axe wound to his face. And Anya is dead via the overdose. So Jimmy takes Curly and sets him in the middle of the table, and of course Curly isn't able to move, so he just kind of lays there. You lay Curly down in the middle of the table and take your seat, and once you look up, all of the crewmates are alive again, except they're still their corpses. For example, Anya still has vomit covering her entire face, Swansea has a bullet wound in the middle of his forehead, and Daisuke has an axe wound on his face, but they're still alive and talking to you. At this point in the game, it is very apparent that Jimmy is just mentally fucking unwell and has been hallucinating a lot of the things that have been going on around him. The only question that I still have, even now, is how long has this been going on and what in the game did we hallucinate and did we not hallucinate? They all clap and tell you how great of a captain you are, how good of a job you're doing, and that you guys should celebrate. So what Jimmy does is take the same knife that he used to cut the cake and cut Curly's leg off at the shin. And the game makes you do it by taking a knife and sawing at his leg. And Curly is just screaming the entire time. And then it fades to black again. When you come to, you're back in the medical bay. Curly isn't there, Anya isn't there, nobody else is in there. As a matter of fact, the door is locked and you can't leave the room. The only way to progress is to go down the exact same vent that fucked up Daisuke. So you drop down into the vent and you immediately start hallucinating wild shit. One of the examples of what you hallucinate is a bunch of ponies strung together like a centipede, and it's hunting you down in the vents. When you finally get to the exit of the vents, you end up in the utility room, except Swansea is tied up on a chair and there is a gun at your foot, and your entire objective is to, of course, kill Swansea. Right before you go to kill Swansea, you hallucinate that you're in a graveyard for whatever fucking reason, and Swansea is in the graveyard hunting you with an axe. And it is kind of like nerve-wracking because there is a lot of corners, a lot of close angles that you would have to clear, but you can't aim and move at the same time. So you're just basically walking around and then just quick scoping as he's coming by. What Swansea didn't know is that I was supreme in CSGO, so I'm about the shit, bitch. Fuck you. Once you kill Swansea in the cemetery, you come back into the room with him and he starts talking to you saying like, listen, I was a fucking alcoholic. I would wake up with a bottle in my hand, and then I put the bottle down because I had a vision that I was floating down the river and I was dead. So I dropped the bottle and I came to work for this company for 15 years. And I came to realize that the happiest points of my life were spent with a bottle in my hand. And the only other time that I felt anything was when that kid came and made my life a living hell. He's talking about Daisuke because he was like directly under him, and he kind of felt like at this point what I picked up on was that Daisuke was like kind of like a son figure to him. So he really cared about Daisuke no matter how badly he treated him. And he basically says, I should have been able to protect the kid, but I couldn't because of you and your failed leadership. And that's when Jimmy, still in his delusion, says, don't worry, Swansea, I'm going to fix everything. And Swansea literally just says, fuck you. And then Jimmy executes him right there. And then you're back into the actual game. You wake up back in the utility room and Swansea's dead with a gun bullet hole in his head. And then you move on. You move through the hallways and eyeballs start popping out of the walls. And then you end up in like a fleshy cylinder that you have to walk through. And once you come out of it, you realize that you were walking inside of Curly's throat and his mouth is open, Astral World style. That was the first thing that came to my head when I saw that. I was like, oh, Astral World. Okay, cool, got it. Moving further along in the game, you can see a figure in the distance lit up by a light, but the figure is very clearly being held there. And as you move closer to him, you see that it is Curly being held up with a bunch of valves attached to him, and the only thing illuminating him is a TV. On the TV is a cartoon of a bunch of characters sitting around a cartoon cake, basically symbolizing the birthday party that they had for Curly before the crash. Once you click on the cake, it will give you an option to take Curly's leg. Once you take Curly's leg, it will then say feast on the TV screen and then cut to a black and white video of a child eating a piece of meat. And this is where this part of the game starts. The way the puzzle game here works is you take the piece of Curly's leg and you feed it to him, and you have to turn the valves, causing him excruciating pain in order to get his leg from his mouth down into his stomach. If you don't do it correctly, for example, if there's a puzzle out of place, he will throw up his leg and you need to do it again. Once you do it correctly and turn around, the TV screen will then say, help me. You watch the TV and you're actually watching yourself, Jimmy, walking through space. I don't know what else that could be. It's space, I think. After like a minute of walking through space, you come to one of the coolest shots, I think, in this entire game, of Jimmy walking across space to Curly, who is sitting on a chair on fire. I love this shot. This is so sick to me. I don't know why, it just is. I love this. Once you approach Curly, he'll start talking to you and say things like, why don't you go into the cryopod and finish what you started and be the good guy like you always wanted to be? That's not what he said per se, but basically that's the gist of his entire conversation. Jimmy then decides to take some responsibility for his actions and come to grips of what he's done, and starts apologizing to Curly because this was all his fault. Everything that happened was his fault because he thought he was trapped and he didn't think that they'd survive, basically. And he was apologizing to him and saying, I'm sorry, I'm so fucking sorry. Like I said, Jimmy's a coward. Jimmy's the main antagonist of this game. Everyone thinks it's Swansea. No, it's Jimmy. Jimmy, fuck you, Jimmy. Once he apologizes, it fades into another hallucination of Jimmy's where he's like giving an ultrasound to I don't even know what this fucking part is. I genuinely am confused at this part. But he's giving an ultrasound to eyeballs and he finds horses inside of them. Haven't figured that one out yet. I'm sure it has something to do with him running away from being a father. And then also something with the company because of the pony thing. But what the fuck? It then cuts to another hallucination. But this time it's the mascot. I think his name's Poye. Paulie. It's pronounced Poye if it's Spanish. But I don't know what. I don't know. I don't know anything about this game. This game's so fucking confusing. But he has a hallucination of Poye. Fuck it, Poye, on top of a mountain of bottles of the mouthwash. I'm basically asking him what he's doing. He's kind of being like a therapist, like, what are you doing? And Jimmy's like, I'm trying to make this right. And then Poye is like, no, you aren't, stupid fuck. And Jimmy's like, dude, seriously, I'm trying. He's like, fuck you. I don't, my brain was so fucking scrambled when I did this because this whole game was just so fucking confusing. I don't get, from this point on, I don't know. I'm just going to tell you what I saw in the game. Once that hallucination ends, Jimmy comes to his senses and is again sitting at the table with all of his crewmates dead around him, except for Curly, who is still on the table. So he takes Curly down to the utility room and places him in the cryopod. You then take on the perspective of Curly inside of the cryopod and Jimmy on the outside. And Jimmy basically telling you, no one can hurt you now. We fixed it. I fixed it. And then he walks off screen and then fucking shoots himself in the head. And then the cryo chamber activates, freezing him to preserve him. And then the game fucking ends. To me, the game made sense all the way until he went down into those vents. After that, it lost me. I don't know what the fuck. I don't know. And if this video made no sense to you, I know, because the game made no sense to me. It's like me trying to explain something in Mandarin, except I don't understand Mandarin. Anyway, regardless of how confused I was, I still think that this is an off-the-wall, insane, but amazing game. I really, really did like this game. With that being said, in the description of this video is the Steam link to where you can go ahead and play it as well. I highly suggest you guys all play it so you can experience it for yourself, because holy shit, what the fuck. Sorry for that extremely confusing and convoluted timeline. I explained it as you play it. Like everything I said happens in the game in that order. So, sorry. I tried. Like I said, I'm a personal fan of extreme horror when it comes to any part just pushed past its boundary, and this game kind of did it for me in the psychological, drug-induced hallucination off the wall type shit. So this kind of fit right up my alley, and I absolutely loved it. But if you know any games like that, please leave them in the comment section below, and I will try and turn it into the video. Unless it's something like this, because this was a struggle. I've been recording for like 3 hours now, and I don't know how long this video is, but it ain't 3 hours. If you're a fan of the horror genre, whether it be books, video games, movies, or you're just curious about horror and want to learn about it without actually having the crushing atmosphere of a terrifying horror film, and just want to learn about horror via a guy who thinks he's funny, you should consider subscribing. Don't forget to like this video because it helps the channel out a lot. We just crossed 30,000 subscribers again. Thank you guys all so much for supporting me and my wild fucking dream. Not really a dream. Goal. Not goal. Dream. I really want to just make horror my job. And that would be sick if you guys could help me. I love this genre more than any other genre in the history of entertainment. So to be able to talk like this, to be able to explain things to people is just amazing to me. So it would mean the world to me if you guys help me by supporting, subscribing, liking the video, or heading over to my Patreon and becoming a free member there to watch the uncensored versions of these videos. But anyways, guys, if you guys got nothing else for me, I got nothing else for you. I will see you guys next week in a brand new video of whatever the fuck I come up with. All right. See you guys later. Bye. You're still here. Again, dude, go to sleep.